Hello everyone, and welcome to a brand new theory and speculation video. Today, I want to talk about the history of the Knave, as well as my thoughts on Arlecchino becoming playable. Her backstory seems really interesting so far, so I wanted to cover what we know about it. Also, this video does contain spoilers for the quests listed on screen now, so if you haven't done those, you have been warned. With all that said though, let's get right into the video. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Arlecchino we met during the Fontaine Archon quests is not the original Knave. There was at least one before her, who I'll be referring to as the Previous Knave throughout this video. She has been mentioned a few times, both in dialogue relating to the very special fortune slip, as well as some of Fremene's character stories and voice lines. As for her personality, she seems to have been a lot colder than our current Knave. Don't get me wrong, Arlecchino can act cold, but she is seemingly much kinder as compared to her predecessor. She despised failure and would inflict searingly painful punishments to those who failed missions. Even after she was succeeded by the current Knave, FM would continue to pursue her directives, hence the story of the very special fortune slip. Now, this quest does mention the name Arlecchino a few times, but it isn't clear as to which Knave the characters are referring to here. It is currently unknown if the Previous Knave also went by Arlecchino, but if she did, this could imply that she is still alive somewhere out there. This would explain why FM would want to increase the prestige of Arlecchino in Inazuma, despite him pursuing the directives of the Previous Knave. Getting back to the Previous Knave's personality though, it seems that she would lie to the children of the House of the Hearth to get what she wanted, which is what she did with Freminet. She told him that his mother had abandoned him and sold him to the House of the Hearth to help with his family's debt. She would also use his lack of knowledge as to his mother's whereabouts to threaten withdrawing protection from her if he disobeyed orders. In reality though, Fremenet's mother had given him to the House of the Hearth to protect him. The family was in severe debt, so she gave him to the house so that he would be safe from the debt collectors. After giving him away, his mother would face the debt collectors alone, with the implication that she was killed. Around this time, a clash would occur in the House of the Hearth between the Previous Knave and a certain child. According to Cheetos, the child would end up succeeding the Previous Knave, becoming the Arlecchino we know today. As of right now, the fate of the Previous Knave is unknown. The title changing hands was probably for the best, at least for the children of the House of the Hearth, as Arlecchino is much nicer to them. They respect her enough to give her the title of father, and she genuinely seems to care for them as well. One day, she returned from a mission and gave Freminet a pendant that belonged to his mother. She then asked what he had been told about her, and when Freminet told her what the Previous Knave had said, her eyes burned with wrath and she fell oddly silent. After a moment, she asked if he wanted to know the truth, to which he nodded. She then told him what really happened between his mother and the debt collectors. As she was about to tell him the fate of his mother, she trailed off, letting the silence speak for her. As Freminet hung his head low, she left the room to leave him alone, knowing his personality. With all of this said though, we know from both Tartaglia and Wanderer that she has a bit of a crazy side. She hides this under her kind exterior, acting like a wolf in sheep's clothing. I do hope we'll be able to see what this crazy side entails one day, but that's for later on in the video. For now, I want to talk about the one problem I initially noticed with the title of the Knave changing hands in relation to the timeline. Cheetos tells us that our current Arlecchino was a child when she replaced the Previous Knave. But we learn from Fremenet's character stories that this change took place while Freminet was already in the House of the Hearth. Theoretically, this would put Arlecchino around the same age as Freminet, which doesn't make sense. In fact, we can deduce that Arlecchino has been a Harbinger for only a little over a decade. In Fremenet's More About Freminet 4 voice line, we learn that Linny and Lynette came to the House of the Hearth after Arlecchino took control, which also aligns with the story that Linny and Lynette told us in the Archon quests. Then, in Linny's story quest, we learned about Caesar, who taught Linny and Lynette magic when they were kids and already members of the Fatui. Caesar would be killed shortly after this, and we learned that these events took place 10 years prior to the game's story. Putting this all together, Arlecchino being a harbinger for just over a decade makes sense. However, this timeline discrepancy still bothered me, as while her being a harbinger for this amount of time mostly adds up, the part about her attacking the previous knave and taking over as a child messes things up for me. That is, until I played through the unfinished comedy World Quest series introduced in version 4.1. In this series, we meet Caterpillar, a character who takes the form of a young boy, and has similar markings on his arms and legs to those of Arlecchino. As the quest progresses, we learn that his true form is that of an animo-hilichurl rogue, and that his human form is some sort of disguise. We also learn that while he appears as a child, he is actually over 400 years old. As for why he is a hilichurl with higher intelligence, we learn that he was given this higher intelligence by the powerful mage Narzizenkreis, or Master. Perhaps something similar could have been done with Arlecchino, either by the same mage or by someone else, such as a member of the Hexenzirkel. Circling back to the markings seen on both of their arms, Arlecchino's seem to be more defined, which could mean that she has more control over her form and is more powerful than Caterpillar. If so, she could have easily had the form of a child back when she faced the previous knave. After the battle, she could have shifted her form into the one we see today, which would explain the supposed discrepancy. All of this would mean that her true crazy self may involve her turning into an extremely powerful hilichurl, which would be incredible to see. Now then, with her past out of the way, let's talk about some story speculations. As of the latest Fontaine Archon quests in version 4.1, Arlecchino doesn't seem to view us as an enemy, but rather an ally. She says that she is looking forward to working with us, and Linny later says that she likely considers us close now as well. To me, this makes it seem that she will be playable at some point in the future, but that's for the next section. For now, I want to talk about potential stories we could see with her, including her own story quest. In this quest, we could learn more about her backstory, including more details on how the title of the knave changed hands and what happened back then. Perhaps we could even meet the previous knave, as her fate was left open-ended. So far, Fontaine has had many stories and characters that revolve around facing the past and dealing with what was left behind. So, a story with Arlecchino facing the previous knave would definitely fit this theme. Now, if the previous knave is still alive, she would very likely want to get revenge on Arlecchino. In this quest, the previous knave could be working in the background to try and take out Arlecchino. Arlecchino would find out about this plan and would enlist our help. Now, we know Arlecchino is incredibly strong, as she is the fourth of the Harbingers, so perhaps something could happen to her that makes her require our assistance. With her likely being a hilichurl similar to Caterpillar, the previous knave could use a method similar to that of the Abyss Order in Requiem of the Echoing Depths to try and weaken Arlecchino. This would all then lead up to a fight against the previous knave, potentially as Fontaine's second weekly boss. With the first weekly boss likely being the narwhal we see at the end of the 4.1 Archon quests, Fontaine currently doesn't have a Fatui Harbinger as a weekly boss. This then breaks the trend of the previous three regions, who all had Harbingers as the first weekly. Perhaps then Fontaine will break another trend, with the second weekly boss being introduced in Arlecchino's story quest instead of Farina's second story quest. Whatever happens, I think it would be really cool to see two Harbingers fighting against each other, especially with both of them being the knave. Additionally, we could even get some other Harbingers involved in this questline, even if they're just mentioned. Perhaps one of the other Harbingers could have been helping the previous knave in her efforts. Personally, I would love it if this helper was a segment of Dottore. Of course, this segment would have been destroyed by Omega Build Dottore at the end of the Sumeru Archon quests, which would have delayed the previous knave's plans. While this may be a stretch, The alignment between these two Harbingers could have been foreshadowed by the Fatui operatives. These enemies of course share design elements with Arlecchino, but there are also plenty of details that fit with Dottore as well. Again, this is probably a stretch, but I still wanted to mention it. Anyways, I think it's time for us to move on to the final section of this video, which talks about Arlecchino as a playable character. To start off, I'd like to say that I think Arlecchino will definitely become a playable character. It's just a matter of when. We can see that she has a pyro vision on her nape in-game, which heavily implies that she'll be playable. And yes, this is a vision, not a delusion. A delusion would have the Fatui insignia in place of the pyro symbol. As for when she'll be playable, I think it would make sense for her to release within the Fontaine updates. Going with my thoughts about her story quest introducing a new weekly boss, I think she could release during version 4.6. Additionally, playable Harbingers have a trend of using a drop from their own boss fights, so this would fit as well. Now, as a playable character, she would obviously use the pyro element. As for her weapon, I think either a sword or a polearm would fit her. This would make her weapon match one of the weapons used by the Fatui operatives, even though the Wind operative's weapon is more like a cane than a polearm. I am hoping for her to be a pyro sword user, as we only have one pyro sword character as compared to the 3 pyro polearm characters. Either way, I think she would definitely be a DPS in battle, as she is one of the strongest Harbingers. Additionally, I hope that she has synergy with Linny, Lynette, and Freminet in some way, just so a team with all 4 of them would work well. Anyways, that's pretty much it for the lore of the Knave and my speculations on her future. She has definitely become one of my favorite characters in Fontaine, and I can't wait to see what they do with her. If you want more of my thoughts on the future of Fontaine though, I recommend my most recent video that goes over my speculations for version 4.2. I would love to hear what ideas you guys have for Arlecchino in the comments below as well. Anyways, that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Sources and further readings are also in the description if you want to check them out. I hope you all have an amazing day, and I'll see you all in the next video.